Hello, I'm Ron Canada. You may know me as Martin Benbeck from TNG, Chapok from DS9, or Fesek from Voyager. And you're listening to Trek Untold.
Hello and welcome back to Trek Untold, the Star Trek podcast that goes beyond the stars. I'm your host, Matthew Kaplowitz. If you're a regular listener to this series, you know that the majority of our episodes are with character actors, because Star Trek, like all episodic television, employed thousands of them through each series. Some did Trek early in their career, others at the tail end, but if you've learned anything from this podcast, it's ultimately a true who's who of people that have passed through the series. There's many performers who have had and continue to have truly great careers, but aren't celebrated whatsoever for their efforts. And for Trek Untold, that's always been the concept of the show, to make sure that those people get the spotlight. Today's interview especially feels like one of those where the concept of this show to honor those who don't normally get that giant spotlight has never been more true. Today, we're speaking with Mr. Ron Canada. Ron has appeared 3 different times in the Star Trek franchise. First in the Next Generation episode The Masterpiece Society as Martin Benbeck, a sort of judge-like character who was part of a genetically engineered group of humans on a doomed planet. He returned to Deep Space Nine as Chapok in The Rules of Engagement, a Klingon lawyer prosecuting Worf due to an incident where all was, of course, not what it seemed. His final appearance in the franchise was in the Voyager episode titled Juggernaut, and he played the Malon named Fesek, who teamed up with the crew to prevent his damaged freighter from exploding and polluting the galaxy. Outside of Star Trek, Ron has been a professional actor for over 4 decades and has appeared in over 200 films and television shows, including Adventures in Babysitting, Dallas, Cheers, Parker Lewis Can't Lose, A Different World, Sister Sister, Family Matters, L.A. Law, Honey, I Blew Up the Kid, Home Alone 2, Hanging with Mr. Cooper, Murder 1, Felicity, The X-Files, The Shield, One-on-One, The West Wing, Cinderella Man, Stargate SG-1, Ted 2, The Orville, and much, much, much more. In my research for this interview, I was surprised to see how little there was out there about Ron. There were a few very short clips of him discussing his work on YouTube, but each was like less than 3 minutes long. And there were practically no text articles either, so I'm very happy to say this is probably the most in-depth interview about this very excellent actor, and it's really about time that somebody profiled this genius of the stage, screen, and television. It's also one of the longest interviews I've ever done on Trek Untold, and that's because there was just so much to talk about, and Ron had so many very interesting and intelligent things to say about performing. And you know what? Ron deserved all that time, and much, much more. So let's spend a few hours today with Ron Canada and learn all about who he is and what he does. But before we jump into our interview, I want to ask you, are you following Trek Untold on social media? It's the best way to keep up to date on who's going to be the next guest on Trek Untold and to learn all about the other cool things that are happening here. So if you're on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, go ahead and look up Trek Untold, all one word, and give us a follow and a like. If you'd like to help support the show monetarily, go ahead and check out teespring.com/stores/TrekUntold to check out some of the merchandise we have available. This includes t-shirts, mugs, phone cases, sweatshirts, stickers, and a whole bunch more. So go ahead and check out teespring.com/stores/TrekUntold. You can also support our show by visiting patreon.com/TrekUntold. If you become a paid subscriber to Trek Untold, you'll get first access to the show and a chance to ask our guests questions on future episodes. But most of all, please subscribe to this show wherever you're listening to it or watching it. And if you've already done that, please also leave a review and a rating if you can. Leaving ratings and reviews helps increase the visibility of podcasts on platforms like iTunes and other places like it. It shows that you're listening and that you like it, and that other people who are interested in the same subject are going to probably like it too. It helps us grow, it helps us get better guests, and it helps us keep bringing this amazing Trek Untold show to you. If you're already following us or have supported us in any other way, thank you, of course, for being a part of the Trek Untold family. There's a lot of Star Trek podcasts out there, and we're very grateful that you chose us to listen to. I'd also like to make a quick shout out to our friends at Triple Fiction Productions, who make some great 3D printed Star Trek inspired toys and replicas for fans of all ages and toys of all sizes. But you'll hear more about them a little later on in the show. Now, without further ado, let's beam up this week's guest. Computer, access interview file. And welcome back to Trek Untold, and now joining us on the other side of the line, We have Mr. Ron Canada, whose face you have seen many, many times in many shows, films. We're going to talk about a few of those today, and of course, a bunch of Star Trek episodes. Mr. Canada, how are you today?
I'm fine. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for having me.
It's so great to actually be chatting with you today because, again, you're one of those character actors whose faces I've seen in so many things. So it's a real pleasure to be able to chat with you today about some of that work.
I appreciate being here.
So outside of your actual appearance in Star Trek, can you tell us what's your earliest memory of Star Trek?
Well, the first season, what year was that? 66, 67?
66, yeah.
Okay. I think I recall it used to come on Fridays. And there had been a long time when there had been no space shows. TV goes through periods of Westerns and detectives and space shows, though, had been noticeably absent from the genres that were on TV at the time. I had watched in the 50s, though, I had watched a show. There was a couple of shows that I liked, outer space shows, when I was a preteen. Rocky Jones, Space Ranger, prominently. And they used to run in New York City, where I grew up, on Channel 9, WOR TV. They used to run a lot of the old Buster Crabbe Flash Gordons with Ming the Merciless and all of that. And I was a big fan of those. But as I said, in the 60s, there weren't very many space shows. I never, maybe that Space Family Robinson thing, but I don't know. I think that was after Trek, but I couldn't get into that for some reason. But anyway, Star Trek just blew my mind. For one thing, they had an African American woman, Uhura, there, which was mind blowing in 1966. And then there were episodes in which Percy Rodriguez, I think, would guest star. And I think there was one with maybe Raymond St. Jacques. I'm not sure, but definitely Percy Rodriguez. An African-American actor at the time who went on to be very big in the movie trailer voice business. And an actor I got to know and would become pivotal in my career many years later, William Marshall, in his episode where he had the automated system controlling a starship, or that was installed in the Enterprise for testing. Anyway, all of that was extremely exciting on television, because other than I Spy with Bill Cosby and Robert Culp, there weren't that many shows that featured African Americans prominently in their cast. And so it was very exciting, and it was outer space. And I remember that me and a small group of my close pals then would, gather together often to watch it. I believe, my memory seems to tell me it used to come on Friday nights, but I'm not sure. But I was just totally caught up in it and tried not to miss episodes in those first couple of first 2 seasons, I guess. I guess there were only maybe 3 or 4, but the first. But I fell in love with the show almost immediately.
That's great. Like your story about seeing someone who looks like you in Star Trek. It's not a foreign one either to a lot of Star Trek actors. A lot of folks we talked to, in fact, on this show, they felt very much inspired seeing someone that looked like them. It's a big deal.
It was rare. I mean, the world was, I've lived long enough now to appreciate how much and swiftly the world has changed. And it's very hard for people, I think, maybe under 40, to understand, or certainly people under 30, that the world that I grew up in, I was a teenager in 66, seeing people of color on TV. Oh, there was also George Takei as a regular, and, not playing, a sort of cliche character who couldn't pronounce R's and turns R's into L's and so forth. That was tremendous. Although there had been Asian characters in a series that I think Mr. Roddenberry wrote for, Have Gun Will Travel. I believe he wrote several episodes of that. And there would be Asian characters in that who were some portrayed as intelligent, dignified human beings, although at a lower social status. But that was, but the world I grew up in, for instance, there were no women pilots. There were no, there were very few women attorneys. There were no women firefighters. There were no women policemen. And I'm talking 1966. And so if you look at the world today, there was no openly gay anybody's doing anything. So yeah, this has been a tremendous change, societal change in 35 years.
You mentioned already that you grew up in New York. I'm actually from Queens also, so I'm a New Yorker myself. I'd like to
Mm-hmm.
know a little about what part you grew up in, what your parents did for a living, and what little Ron wanted to be when he grew up.
Well, let's see. Let me answer those questions in sequence. I grew up on 127th Street between 7th and 8th Avenue in a housing project called the St. Nicholas Projects. I was out of the front door of my building. If I could have walked in a straight line for 2 blocks, I would have walked through the back door of the Apollo Theater in Harlem. So very central Harlem, near the intersection of 125th Street and what was then called 7th Avenue. What did I want to be when I grew up? I didn't know. I at that time, as a little kid, I didn't know. I had no real ideas. Again, the field of opportunities to think about what one could be for someone like me, an African American boy, were a lot narrower than today, when a person of color can imagine themselves to be anything, including president or vice president of the United States. Again, this was a long time ago, so I don't think I had a very clear idea of what the future held. And my father was a longshoreman, what some people refer to as a stevedore, but I know stevedore is a particular title on a dock. My dad worked the New York City waterfronts for 50 years. He worked in Hoboken and in New York. When you see the movie On the Waterfront, and you see them all gathering to be picked there with Terry, with Marlon Brando's character, and you see, sprinkled in there, black guys. Those were portraying the persons that my father, that was his job, loading and unloading ships. He was particularly he worked for a long time on what was Pier 40 on New York's west side, near the vicinity of Houston, Canal Street. I think it's at the end of Canal, or maybe just north of Canal. It was the old Holland America lines dock where the SS Amsterdam and the SS Rotterdam would dock in their transoceanic voyages. So I grew up with a picture of the Amsterdam on the wall, in my bedroom, a painting that he had brought home and put up in my room.
So when did you first discover acting was something that you had an interest in?
I was in high school, and my best friend at the time attended the High School for Performing Arts, which was located on 46th Street. It's back to being a school now. One time it was a firehouse, but the movie Fame, where Irene Cara sings, "I want to live forever." Well, that school was a real thing. Actors like Ben Vereen and Suzanne Plachette, two that come to mind, graduated from there. And my friend was a year behind Ben Vereen. Anyway, so I would hang out with him a lot because they had the most fun parties, and they were young actors, and they had the most interesting girls, and they were just a more sophisticated crowd. So I got exposed to these, teenage actor or wannabe actor people. And through my friend, I remember my friend was in a Broadway play with Paul Ford, the colonel from the old Sergeant Bilko TV series. And anyway, I went to the opening night party with my friend, and it piqued my interest in movies and television, and I just always was drawn to it. I became more and more interested in movies and film, and I always had the feeling that I could do that. I can't explain it, but I always felt that I could be on camera. It evolved very shortly in the late '60s to wanting to do the news, but I always felt that I could be on camera. And lo, I've spent now, oh God, almost 50 years. 2021 will be my 50th year, and I've been on camera every year for 50 years.
Yeah, it's very, very impressive. And you've got a wonderful resume to show as well from all that time in acting. Do you remember what your first gig was that was ever on TV or on film?
Let's see. Well, the funny thing was, strangely enough, back when I was a senior in high school, 1966, a magazine, a teenage magazine, I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, I somehow got commissioned to write an article, to visit a movie set and write an article about it. And the movie set was the set of Up the Down Staircase. I believe the director's name was Robert Mulligan, and it starred Sandy Duncan and Eileen Heckart, and it was set in a New York public school. And so as part of the experience, I got to be background in that movie, and that was really the very first time that I was in a Hollywood picture. There's one scene in that movie where I can be, well, I know where to look, but I can be clearly seen as Eileen Heckart and Sandra Duncan talk by the punch bowl at the high school prom, and in between them, I can be spotted there as a student. I was background at that time, but let's see, acting. There was where I actually got to say lines. There was a local television production in Washington D.C. Done at the Channel 7 there, WJLA, and I had a brief one scene part playing someone's boss or something. It was just one scene. It was just a line or two. That was my first time I spoke on camera, not as a newsman, but as an actor. And then the first time I really had a principal part in a film was in a very bad remake of The Invisible Man. I think it was called The Man Who Wasn't There. And it starred Steve, oh God, 3 Men and a Baby.
Steve Guttenberg?
Steve Guttenberg. I spoke my first lines to Steve Guttenberg. I played a guy who was out in front of a porno theater trying to hustle in customers. And as part of his misadventures as the Invisible Man, he came, there was some clue he had to get in this joint, and he came across me in front of the theater, and we had an exchange, and I think we slapped five or gave each other a pound, as we said in the vernacular, and he went on about his way. But that trailer, I later found out years later, was edited by a guy who directed me in a movie, Howie Deutsch, who I think directed a couple of John Hughes movies, but he directed me in a movie called Getting Even with Dad with Macaulay Culkin and Ted Danson, and he let me know he remembered me from that trailer, that he had cut the trailer for that terrible version of The Invisible Man. That was 1981, 82, I think, somewhere in there. But that's how I got my SAG card and became officially a member of the Screen Actors Guild. I had been a member of American Federation of Television and Radio Artists since 1971. because I had been, in the television news business. So
I think one of the first times I can remember actually recognizing your face on TV was in Family Matters. And you did 2 episodes of that as Dave McClure, the man who owned the Mighty Weenie franchise. And you got to do,
the genie of weenies. That's
yes,
right.
the Genie of Weenies. And you got to do some scenes with Jaleel White, Darius McCreary. Do you remember anything about working with those guys?
Oh, Darius is such a good actor, and I've often wondered why he hasn't seen more. He was first of all, he's such a fabulous young man, and I think he did. Yet I did see him in a very powerful couple of scenes in The Leftovers, the fantastic HBO series of a couple of years ago with some of the best acting I've ever seen on television uniformly. That starred Justin Trudeau and the great Carrie Coon and Regina King. It was a fantastic HBO series, and Darius had a couple of scenes. He was some kind of seer or visionary. He was wonderful. I remember him. What a lovely young person he was, and how professional he was. And of course, Jaleel was in the height of playing the Urkel character, and so I interacted with Urkel. We had a scene where he came to my house and to date my daughter. I think the actress's name was Tammy Townsend, and he broke some super expensive vase of mine or something. Anyway, people remember the episodes and they like them. And when you're a guest star and you got to fit into what's going on, and part of it is understanding why you're there. To create the texture around the money, the star, and Urkel was the star, and so we were able to do that successfully. I do remember though enjoying having more interaction with Darius and thinking very, very highly of him. And the funny thing was that at the beginning of that series, Reggie VelJohnson, it was meant to be a series, where he was the lead because he had achieved some fame in the first Die Hard movie. And they were building the series around him. He ended up playing the dad. And he ran into some sort of legal problems just before the show was to go on, and Hollywood always has replacements ready. And so I remember I went to an audition over at the studio. I think it was Columbia Sony, where I auditioned for that dad role for the possibility should they have to replace Reggie, which they did not. Good for him. And he went on to with Jaleel and Darius to have many years of success, which I begrudge him not, because it was his role to begin with. I'm glad he escaped his difficulties and went on to be very successful.
Absolutely. Reggie deserved it. I mean, he's the man that saved Bruce Willis and the Ghostbusters and had to deal with Urkel. So, I mean, that's quite a career in itself right there.
Yes, it was.
So a film I'm a little late to the party with, but I just saw recently, Adventures in Babysitting, and you were in that as well. And I want to mainly ask about that film because you worked in that film with Anthony Rapp, who's now Lieutenant Stamets on Star Trek Discovery. So I'm curious if you have any memories of working with Anthony.
Anthony, sure. Anthony was a very outgoing, exuberant young man. I mean, that cast, if you look at that cast, many of us have gone on to quite substantial careers. As a matter of fact, I was just watching Elizabeth Shue as the boss on The Boys, which I've just started to watch. And she is, I think her name is Stillwell. She's the big corporate honcho leader. But Elizabeth, Bradley Whitford, who I went on to work with, Anthony, who was a redheaded kid with a kind of Buster Brown haircut, I think in the movie.
I love your description.
but Penelope Ann Miller, Lolita Davidovich, Vincent D'Onofrio from Law and Order fame. I mean, if you look at the cast of that movie, a lot of careers got started in that movie, including that was Chris Columbus, who went on to be the Grand Poobah of Harry Potter. That was Chris's first directing job. He had written Gremlins, and I think he had written Goonies, if I'm not mistaken, and he had written a remake of Breathless, and this was Chris's first chance to direct. And so we all launched each other, and I'm very proud of it. It's one of America's favorite movies. It's been enormously, enormously profitable for Disney. It was made for $7 million, and they have made their money back in multiples, and it's now in its third generation of people viewing it, because people who were little kids then, back in 1987, who are 40 to 50 now, have introduced their kids to the movie, and I can tell from the residuals it's still popular.
Yeah, I only just saw it this year, in fact, and I got to say, objectively speaking, it still just very much holds up. It's just a well-constructed movie with great performances. It seemed like a lot of fun to actually be on that set too and making it.
It was a fabulous experience. It was my first really big, fairly large movie role. The villain throughout the movie is sort of chasing the kids, one of the two villains, along with John Chandler. Chris gave me a fabulous ending to the movie. Anyway, that movie in the summer of 1987, you can look it up. We were number one, surprise number one at the box office for a week or two. That movie, Rising Tide Lifts All Ships, that movie opened up Hollywood for me and got Hollywood very, very interested in me. I owe so much to that movie, and to Deborah Hill and Linda Obst, who were the producers, and to Chris Columbus. And I'm proud to have worked with all of those cast members. And I always delight when I see Elizabeth or Penny Miller or Anthony and his great success in Rent. And now he's part of Trek World. It's wonderful. But Anthony was quite an exuberant and confident young kid. I think he was 12. I believe Anthony was just turning 13, going from 12 to 13 at the time. And he was there with his mom every day. Yeah.
Did you ever get to visit him on any the Broadway shows you worked on?
No, but I run into Anthony in the city a couple of times, and he's always very warm. I did not see Rent when it was on Broadway, but we have crossed each other's paths, and it's always good to see him, and it's great to see the tremendous success that he's had as an adult. Of the kids, I think he's had the most substantial career. But he's 13 years old, and he was being hit on by the credits call her Lolita Lola David. She then evolved into Lolita Davidovich, who was very much a leading actress in the 90s and very early 2000s, and is still around and is still a wonderful actress. But she played the college girl that hit on Anthony, and that was something for a 12 to 13-year-old.
Ron, I've got to ask you something about a little bit of a more schlocky movie, but it's we got to do it here. This is a geeky show at the end of the day too. But
Sure.
you were in Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. That's what David
Absolutely.
Hasselhoff. It's heralded as it's an early Marvel film, but it's not one that's very well regarded. You were Gabriel Jones, who I don't know if you're aware was actually the very first ever Black Marvel character.
I did not know he was the first, but I did know when the Marvel comics came out. I told you I'm from the kid from the 60s, so I used to consume, Thor and X-Men and Nick Fury and all these characters, and the Hoff. What a character! What a guy! He's a great guy, actually. He's an interesting person. But the Hoff was the last Caucasian Nick Fury. The Hoth, after the Hoth, Nick Fury became Samuel L. Jackson. People may not know that, but
much better choice.
Yeah, Samuel's predecessor as Nick Fury was David Hasselhoff. And that was, we made it up in Vancouver, and it wasn't great. It wasn't a great strip. You've seen it, you know what it was and what it wasn't, but it was a lot of fun because the Hoff is a lot of fun. He's a big personality, and he has, at least when I worked with him, he has a good time at work. He believes in just, he's a happy warrior, or he was when I met him. And he was on top of the world, he was the king of Baywatch Kingdom. And what I remember most was the time spent with him. He was a fun guy. The last time I saw him, we were getting ready, was on the set, was at base camp for TNG, and it seems like the Hoff had a scene that was cut from TNG. But that's a little trivia for your audience, I guess, to know that the Hoff was scheduled to appear on TNG. I know because I went and knocked on his trailer, and we greeted each other and laughed, and then he ended up, I guess, on the cutting room floor. But a little bit of trivia.
I just find it interesting because it's kind of a segue to my next question, the next thing I want to ask about. But Gabe Jones, in terms of Marvel Comics, like, he was really the first Black character in any of the Marvel comics to be a prominent character. Mm-hmm. And it kind of bugged me that in the film, his character is relegated to be more of I don't want to say pencil pusher, but he doesn't get as much action as the Gabe Jones does in the comics. Because in the comics, he's carrying a bugle, he's carrying a rifle, he's joining the Howling Commandos on missions.
Yeah. Well, they made him a suit, which is, I guess, is why they came to me, because you may have noticed I have played, and I will continue to play suits. I'm a bum in real life, but in a good 50% of my, bum clothing wise. Okay. But I'm a blue jeans and t-shirt guy a lot of times, but a lot of my career, a Brooks Brothers suit. And that's, I guess, part of the reason I was cast as Gabe, rather than, some six-pack guy. My six-pack days were over by the time my career got really going. But Gabe was a scientist, was a kind of function like the gadget master for Nick Fury in that Nick Fury Agent of Steel. Sort of like, I guess, what's the character in James Bond who comes up with the gadgets? Q. Yes, I sort of played Q to Nick Fury. Gabe was in this manifestation.
See, it kind of leads into my next question, because I wanted to talk to you about Cinderella Man, and you played Joe Jeanette. And the thing that bothered me, I just rewatched the movie because I do a lot of heavy research for these interviews, and I like to ingest as much as I can from the people I'm speaking with. And having just rewatched Cinderella Man, it's like basically you are in the opening scene, and then you're in the final fight, but you don't really say much. And it's disappointed to me because Joe Jeanette was the guy in real life that as a trainer, he's the man that trained James Braddock. But even beyond that, this is a man who fought Jack Johnson 10 times, Jim Johnson 10 times. He was the first colored heavyweight champion.
Yes.
He's not the first, but he was one of them. He was a big deal at his time, in his heyday. He was from New Jersey. And I felt like, he should have had a lot more. So maybe you can help me out here. Was there more for the character in the film?
No, there wasn't. And I was the last person added to the major cast. And I think I was insisted upon by Universal and Miramax, because I don't think they wanted to do a boxing movie without a major African-American character. So I have to be very careful about what I say. People can read between the lines of what they, I would say that my impression throughout was that the Joe Jeanette character was, in the conception of this particular group of filmmakers, an afterthought. And that's about all I want to say about that.
All right, I won't budge too more about that in particular. I just know if, I guess as the viewer, I can say
Your
this.
observation, I understand your observation, and I certainly concur. I had a great time making the film. I had a great time with Russell. I had a great time with the great Angelo Dundee because I'm a boxing fan. I've had quite a few boxing movie, television show character credits on my resume. I enjoyed my time in Toronto with them very much. I enjoyed Paul Giamatti very much. It was in many ways a wonderful experience, but I will say that I think that your observations about the film and the character are correct. And I will simply say that I don't think I was part of that character was prominent in the conception of the filmmakers. And I think that I was in the movie by studio insistence.
Well, I will say you don't have to comment on this one on my comment here, but one of the things that bothered me a lot is how half time I'd see your character, he'd be blocked by Paul Giamatti or something else would be covering his face. It was just one of those annoying things I noticed. And I really hated it because Joe Jeanette played a bigger role in James Braddock's life than the movie shows. But we'll leave it at that. But
the one thing I thank you for that observation. The one thing I would say is you have to look at the filmmaker and look at their filmography, and that's it.
Yeah, I do want to add, I'm from a combat sports journalism background, so I've covered boxing, UFC, MMA, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, on this show, I never really get to talk about it much. So I would love to hear any stories or any memories you have of Angelo Dundee.
Oh, I loved him so. I loved the maestro. He called me the professor, and I called him the maestro, and we got along fabulously because he soon figured out that I was a real boxing fan. And so I got to spend every day with Angelo, and I got to ask him every question or any question that occurred to my mind about Muhammad Ali, about Ray Leonard, about Carmen Basilio, about the boxing game, about his observations and thoughts. He introduced me while we were up there. He introduced me to George Chavallo, who came by the set. We shot a lot of that in the old Maple Leaf Garden. The legendary Maple Leaf Garden is where the fight scenes were shot. And George Chavallo, who was a great Canadian heavyweight, as you probably well know, Muhammad Ali pounded him for 15 rounds and couldn't get George Chavallo out of there. George Chavallo had a head that was made of granite. But he introduced me to George. He introduced me to the Braddock family when they came by the set. Angelo introduced me to Norman Mailer. And I got to have a chat, just me and Norman Mailer at lunch one day, which I will be forever grateful to Angelo for. But Angelo was an amazing font of knowledge, a very positive, bright spirit, effervescent and loquacious, and he had a great affection for Russell, and Russell Crowe and Russell for him. Angie said to me, he would watch Russell, and he said, Ronnie, he said, if I had gotten this kid, I could have made something out of him. So anybody who thinks Russell Crowe's toughness or athletic ability is totally fake, I'm telling you what Angelo Dundee told me to my face. I'll never forget. He says, we were watching Russell in the ring with a young Canadian amateur light heavyweight going at him. And he says, Ronnie, they were sparring. He says, I could have made something. I got this kid early. I could have made something out of him.
So one other thing before we jump into Trek stuff here, and that's you were in Boston Legal for several episodes throughout the entire series. That's Judge Willard Reese, and that show has a lot of Star Trek alumni in it. I mean, off the bat, we've got Shatner and Renee Auberjonois in the film, in the series, but you've also got, I think actually one of the episodes you did, I don't think you were on in any scenes with them, but you had Armin Shimmerman and Ethan Phillips. So I'm just curious if you
Yes.
have any memories of working with any of, either Shatner, Renee, or any Trek folk.
It's funny. In preparation for this interview, I went back and rewatched my episodes, which I hadn't seen in years, because contrary to what people may believe, actors do not sit around watching themselves in movies. That way lies insanity, as in Sunset Boulevard.
I'm ready for
Uh,
my close-up, Mr. Canada.
yeah. So I hadn't seen these episodes I'm not actually watched full episodes. If I come across them, I might watch them for a minute or two, and then because I was there, and but I watched all the episode of all three modern Treks that I was in, and I was thinking about Renee, who passed away recently, as I'm sure your viewers know, within the last year. I think Renee. He was a lovely, lovely gentleman, and he introduced me to the very interesting and unusual William Shatner while I was at Boston Legal. So Renee, who had been very warm and gracious and knew what it was like to be a guest star, had been very gracious and friendly to me, and we were walking across one of the secondary sound stages, and I saw Renee coming toward me with Mr. Shatner, who was apparently either headed to or from makeup. He had the paper towels all around his collar, which is the telltale thing that people have recently been in the makeup chair or on their way back to it. And Renee, we're walking toward each other, and he says, "Oh, Ron," he says, have you met Bill Shatner?" I said, "No, I haven't." I said, "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Shatner." Marty, he says, "Bill, this is Ron Canada." And William Shatner, in one of the strangest encounters I've ever had, said to me, he looked at me and said, "And so am I," and proceeded on his way. I still puzzle it. What the heck happened there? He was unusual, to say the least. Armin, I knew from the episode of Deep Space Nine that I did. He was one of my witnesses when I played Counselor Chapok in the Deep Space Nine episode called Rules of Engagement, which is sort of a legal courtroom thing staged on Deep Space Nine. And so I knew Armin, and then Ethan I worked with on the episode I did of Voyager, which was called Juggernaut. So we had scenes together, but did not encounter them ever on the Boston Legal set, except for that crossing of paths with Mr. Shatner. And I think Renee was in my courtroom once in one episode, but he was a lovely man and a superb and gifted actor and an important member of the American stage and the Broadway community and so forth.
If I can help demystify the Shatner anecdote, I don't know if you're aware, Shatner is actually from Canada, so maybe that's why. Maybe he was confused or something.
Maybe that was it. Maybe when Renee said, "This is Ron Canada," maybe that was the reason for his reply. It was an odd moment. It was strange.
That sums up Shatner in one word: strange.
Yes. He's, as I say, an unusual personality.
Trek Untold will return momentarily. Trek Untold is brought to you by Triple Fiction Productions. If you're a Star Trek cosplayer looking for props, or toy collector looking to spice up your shelves, Triple Fiction Productions has you covered. Triple Fiction Productions produces affordable and unique 3D printed Trek-inspired products from the original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, and the movies. You can expect the same amount of care and attention to detail in any of the items in their catalog, whether it's a prop replica for use in a fan film, or a part of a cosplay, or accessories and playsets for figures from Playmates, Migos, or Diamond Select. Own your very own tricorder or phaser rifle with working lights, the bridge of the Enterprise E for your Playmates figures, or any other item from countless species and ships from the Star Trek universe. All products are 3D printed in the USA and are constantly evolving and improving based on fan feedback. To learn more about their products, visit them at triple-fictionproductions.net or on Facebook at facebook.com/triplefictionproductions. Triple Fiction Productions, taking Star Trek where no 3D printer has gone before.
Hello, everyone. I'm Armin Shimmerman. Perhaps you know me better as Quark from Deep Space Nine. As your favorite Ferengi, I'm here to promote a sale. It's not self-sealing stem bolts, but my new novel, Illyria. And the first book is called The Betrayal of Angels. Some of you may not know that aside from being an actor, I'm also a novelist. My newest novel is a mystery set in 1583. Its heroes are the historical characters of John Dee, who was a spiritualist, a book collector, and a spy. With him is an unsuccessful playwright named William Shakespeare. Their mission is to investigate a nobleman who happens to be Count Orsino from Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. The book employs comedy, history, and fantasy to tell a page-turner of a story. It reads a lot like Sherlock Holmes, or like one of my favorite shows, Homeland. Please check out my website at www.arminshimmerman, get the name right, .com, or you can get it directly from my publisher at www.jumpmasterpress.com. You can buy it either as a paperback, a hardback, or an ebook. So why don't you check it out and judge for yourself? Or better yet, give it as a gift to someone. I know they'll appreciate it. Disclaimer, no latinum accepted.
We now return to Trek Untold.
All right, so Ron, let's beam into our Star Trek discussion, and let's kick things off with your first appearance of 3 in the franchise, and that was in TNG. You were in the episode The Masterpiece Society as Martin Benbeck.
Yes.
So do you remember much about the audition process for that show? Had you auditioned for Trek previously?
I think I probably had Junie Lowry Johnson and a partner, I think David Surma. They were an office. You know, in an actor's career, you have offices that really like you. You have casting directors that champion your career, that they really believe in your talent, and they call you in again and again on different shows. Sometimes they'll call you in multiple times on a show, especially if the producers respond to you, but you're not quite right for one role. They'll keep bringing you in. And Junie Lowry Johnson, there's a good chunk of my career that I owe to Junie putting me in the room with the producers. So I don't know if it was the first time or maybe it was the second audition that I went in on Trek, and I got Martin. And I don't remember, there are at this point thousands and thousands of auditions. I say to people, I've had my career is supposedly a success, and I do believe it. In my terms, it's a success. And I tell young actors, I say, you know what my batting average is? Auditions successful to auditions had. I said, I bat a solid .100. And I said, that's a very good average. That's an actor's life. So there are a lot of auditions. I don't remember that one particularly. I remember doing the show, though. And I looked at the work today, and when years pass, it's not so difficult to look at the work. And I went, oh, that was okay. That was okay. And I was remembering Day Young and the actor John, who played the lead, and that was the first time I worked with Patrick, and Patrick and Jonathan Frakes and Levar. Yeah, good memory.
So let's talk a little bit about Martin, because Martin is a character who's basically just angry all the time. But the way that you're acting as the character, Martin's angry on a scale of 1 to 10, and your body language and your cadence, it very much informs the audience of what level of rage he's on. So I'd like for you to talk to us a little bit about how you found this character, what you did to make him not just be, angry all the time and just the same flat anger, but kind of having these different varying degrees of anger and portrayal of information within that.
Well, you're right. He's got Martin's hair was always on fire, but I took it. He was a conservative, and I haven't gotten to play conservatives that much in my life. He was a political conservative in the small c sense. He was trying very much to maintain the status quo. He was tasked. His reason for being was to protect the status quo, the rules. And the rules were being threatened at a level that he had never encountered before. And he had never seen this level of violation. And the leader of the planet, I don't recall John's character's name right now, but the leader of the planet, Martin is a close advisor and a counselor who's used to being consulted. And I just started from, well, these guys have worked together. They're together in every scene. They're talking in a very personal way to each other. So I assumed they were colleagues. And there is a kind of anger or when we lose temper with those we know best, or we're disappointed with those we know best, there's a different coloration to it. And so it wasn't always anger. Sometimes it was just disappointment. At other times it was desperation to get him to see the light. And my fury was more at the most directed at the invaders, the violators, the people who had brought us the problem. But I was still trying to win him back, to get him back to his senses. I was trying to deal, there was some in a way with him and Day Young's character, with tough love. So, it's my job. What I get hired to do is to bring, as I say, texture and dimension around the stars, the big money, the personas that the audience tunes in to see. And that means part of my job is to make the storytelling as vivid as I possibly can. If I have my greatest strength, I think, as an actor, is my ability to read the literature and to carry out the writer's intent. And you don't do that. Very few good writers. You don't get cast usually on a good TV show, on successful TV shows, to play one dimension. I've never tried to in my life. You get the job by telling a story in each scene, having goals and having a story that you want to tell with that character in the scene. So from what you say, you saw some of that, and then I'm grateful. Then that means that to some degree I was successful. And they brought me back for 2 more shows, so the 2 different series. So I guess they thought so too.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't mind a mid-interview compliment, and I'm going to talk about this more when we get to DS9, especially, hearing you talk right now, hearing your emotional vocabulary and what you're putting that into with your acting, it's very apparent. I feel like your expressiveness and your ability to translate, a line into giving it an emotion that's not just the most obvious way to handle that emotion. I really think it's one of the very wonderful things about your acting that I admire.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Matthew.
Now, do you recall any of the shoot days and working with Marina, working with Jonathan, working with Patrick? What were those days like?
Well, Star Trek commanded a huge amount of the Paramount studios, the Paramount lot, which is, everybody knows the legendary arch over the entrance to the lot. And it's not the big, huge, colossal thing that, you get from the movies, the Paramount Gate. But I loved going through the Paramount Gate. It always made me feel, wow, I really am in Hollywood. But on this Paramount lot, which is on Melrose Avenue in very central Hollywood, Star Trek had 3 working huge sound stages and a lot of auxiliary buildings. And I got an idea of the scope and the importance of this show to Paramount when I went there and saw the stages and the elaborate sets and just everything that was involved. And what I most remember, and that was a long time ago, it's been almost 25 years now. I remember the rapport and the camaraderie between Patrick, Jonathan, and Levar, particularly, especially Jonathan and Levar. But they had figured out a way to make it fun, and they genuinely seemed to like each other and enjoy each other and be having fun, which isn't always the case on super successful shows. One thing that one way you're on a successful television show, you can tell right away, is there's a lot more relaxation because people have had 4 or 5 years. They've made a lot of money. They're looking at making a lot more money. But sometimes people fall into their separate, camps and so forth, and just don't have that. They're over it, and they do the work, but they don't, have that much to do with each other. But these guys, particularly the next generation crew, just seem to have a genuine bond that you could feel. And later I got to have a much closer working relationship with Patrick and to socialize with him some, and that's real. That rapport that they had, because I guess they were the little engine that could. They came out of nowhere in a way. They went against a huge existing thing, the original Trek, and they won. They made a new. They expanded the fan base, made a new fan base. They were accepted by the Star Trek world, the original world, and I think that there was a joy in being on a winning team, like a winning sports team. They had that kind of swash in their buckle and that kind I'll use the word love for each other, at least at that time when I was around them, and that was palpable.
I think that's a good choice of words because, seeing them at conventions to this day, it still feels like nothing's changed. So love is, I think, a very, very correct word in this situation.
Yeah, they're. I know that Patrick is close to Marina, to Jonathan. I didn't work with Brent Spiner, but they were fond of Brent. Levar, who I have the highest regard for. Maybe we'll talk about that later, directorially. But that is the memory that I take away from that. Sometimes I had to watch the episode again to remember everything that happened in it. But from an actor's point of view, what you remember is the days you spent at work. You spend a lot more time between scenes than you do shooting scenes. Takes a lot. It's a lot longer process to make a television show or a movie than it is to watch it, or even the actual shooting. A lot of it is waiting and sitting around in the chairs and being in your trailer and exchanging stories with people, and so you remember the sets and companies where there was a joyous feeling. They stick out.
We will definitely be talking about Levar Burton in a few minutes because I've got plenty of questions about that. But, since you did mention you had just rewatched the episodes, I just want to ask what you think now, looking at the episode as a final product. Did you like it?
Yeah, Masterpiece Society. Yes, I did. And here's what it struck me today. It was very thoughtful. It was a very serious-minded, adult themed. The thing that made Trek famous. It wasn't just an action shoot 'em up, or I guess what some people call a space opera. It wasn't, about, there was very little quote unquote action. It was about human behavior and psychology and social issues and big issues, the big issue of social engineering and personal freedom and autonomy, all those kinds of things. And I think I said, oh, this is a piece of television I'm proud to have been a part of, because it was smart. It was a smart episode, so I liked it. Yes.
So let's move into Deep Space Nine. But before we start talking about rules of engagement, I just found this out the other day. You were actually up for the part of Martok, and you almost had that part, I read.
Yes, with my old roommate and dear friend to this day, John G. Hertzler. I've had very few roommates in my life, but there was a period in 1977, 78, where I lived in a house off DuPont Circle in Washington, D.C., with three roommates, two gals and John, who invited me to join them. They had an opening in the house and invited me to move in there with them. We had been doing lunchtime theater in government buildings in Washington. And anyway, so John and I became very close then. And Ron Moore had liked my audition so much that he called me at home that night after my audition. He said, we'll call back tomorrow. And he says, here's what, and I'm here in my apartment in Hollywood, and here's, writer, producer guy telling me he liked my audition and tweaks that he wanted me to make for the callback. And I went in and I thought I executed well. And I didn't know that John was coming in, a couple of people after me. And he apparently wowed them. And, there's always somebody who's better in any competitive business. And that day, John was better than me. And, I was thunderstruck that I didn't get the part. So I had my agents call and ask, and they said that my audition had been great, but that this guy, John Hertzler, had come in and just blown them away. So, I talked to John, let's see, about 2 months ago, my phone rang and he was calling me from where he is now in Ithaca, New York. I guess he's up there teaching theater and directing. But we had a great chat about his daughter, Hannah. And, so I lost to one of my dear friends, and at that time, one of my closest friends in the world.
I mean, if you're going to lose, why not make it to someone like that?
Yeah. It made it actually easier to swallow because, John went on and spent it to do the character extremely well, and then to be a big hit at conventions, and it allowed him to raise his daughter and take care of his family, and it all worked out.
Yeah, he's one of those guys I'd love to talk to sometime too, and maybe one day it'll happen. But let's talk about your episode.
Well, he's in Ithaca. You look for him. He's somewhere in the Cornell community. You'll find him.
Oh, I'm gonna go up there for sure. I'm gonna get my friend. He's got his Cornell alumni card. We're gonna go up there and barge our way in the doors.
Yep.
So let's talk now about your episode from season 4, Rules of Engagement. And you are the Klingon named Ch'pak. You are the lawyer from the Klingon homeworld. You're trying to get Worf extradited to the Klingon home planet to deal with the stuff that's going on in that episode. But let's talk about that makeup process, because you are a Klingon, as we mentioned, and the Klingons, they don't have an easy day in the makeup chair. So what do you remember from that part of the show?
Well, Michael, I remember that I had to come in about 4:30. I lived about, at that hour of the morning with no traffic, without speeding, I lived about 8 minutes from the Paramount Gate. And I remember my call was the unbelievable hour, I believe, of 4:30 in the morning. But that's when you were getting a startup makeup job. And I remember Michael Westmore, isn't it? The famous Wake Up, Make family. Yeah. Michael was waiting there for me in the morning himself. And we began a process that went on for more than 3 hours while he fitted me for things. He made that a fantastic set of teeth that I have, including a fang for one of my canines, a fang that kind of was on my lip outside of my mouth. He did all of that personally. From then on, it was handed over from, I think he did the second day. And then from then on, I was in the hands of the assistants once it had been worked out and perfected. But that was certainly the longest time I'd ever been in a makeup chair. And it was a very interesting experience. I don't complain about it. It was quite a transformation. You know, it was fascinating to have him work on me and work with me, because it was a with processes, because he's always communicating and asking what is comfortable and how that feels and so forth. And they are masters of making the makeup, as involved as it is, as comfortable as is possible. And they take wonderful care of you at the end of the day, where there's a makeup taking off process that lasts the better part of an hour, because they also make sure to take care of your skin. But it became so comfortable that by the second day, or late in the first day, I forgot I had it on. And so when people walking around a lot, when people were looking at me strangely, it took me a moment to realize, oh yeah, I've got this stuff on. So it was quite an experience. But that first day, it was 3 hours plus, and then each day thereafter, it was whittled down. But that's what made Star Trek also such a great job, the overtime. Wow.
We've spoken to a lot of actors who have had to do the heavy prosthetics for their characters, and they've all said different things about how it will affect the way they act the character. And so, I want to make, again, an observation about your style of acting, what you do, and something I've noticed through the different roles I've seen you in is how expressive you are and how you make the most out of what you can. And depending on the language of the scene, depending on the language of the show you're on, how you adapt it for that. So, in the case of Ch'pak here, there's a lot of body language because you can't exactly use your eyebrows as much. You can't really use as many facial expressions. So you're using a lot more body language that I picked up on. So I noticed that Ch'pak is usually very hunched over. His hands are always clutched. There's a lot more with the hands in this episode in particular. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you chose to approach this character, not just speaking the lines, but becoming the character.
Well, it's funny you talk about the expressiveness. That's a big help on a stage when you got 500 people and you got to get it out to a distance. But in film, it is a hindrance. It's something that actually I have to learn and concentrate and work against in things where I don't have the prosthetics. I was watching the episode again this morning to recall it, and I noticed some of the things you noticed because, again, that was a long time ago, I believe. 1996 or 7 or something like that. So there have been many performances in between. So I had to refresh my memory. But in the case of the makeup, I didn't have to worry so much about my own rubber face because I had a rubber face over my rubber face, so that I could be as a Klingon broader than I would be if I were playing as I was when I was playing Martin Benbeck, or when I would be playing a judge on The Affair or something, or West Wing. You don't want to be doing too much with your face because it distracts people from the part of your face that people really watch in a close-up, something I call the golden rectangle, from the bottom of your lower lip to the top of your eyebrows to the outer edges of both your eyes. That rectangle is what we watch when we watch movie and television performances. And so everything that's in the close-up, that is. So everything that moves in a close-up other than that is a distraction. All great movie stars and all great film actors, television actors, they have one essential quality to begin with. They are still. They have tremendous stillness. Their bodies don't rock and move in the frame. Their heads don't bob. Well, so many of them don't have much of a blink reflex. So, I mean, Patrick is an example. He's extremely still. And so you get pulled into that area, which I described as the golden rectangle, to look for meaning. You don't want to go toward the lens. You want to draw the lens to you. The lens is skittish. It's like a small animal, you know. If you go at it, it runs away, you know.
I can definitely see that. And watching this episode again, having just seen the other two episodes that were in Star Trek, I felt like Ch'pak, I really got drawn in. That's a great way to put it. I was very much drawn in. And it definitely helps the way that Levar Burton set these shots up. Because, like, the way I do these watch throughs is I'll be taking screenshots as I go along to use on social media. And I just couldn't stop taking screenshots of Ch'pak because he was always so composed wonderfully in every shot he's in. And just there's always just something about him, something magnetic about this character.
Thank you. I watched it today. I said, okay, I'm proud of that work. I've always been proud of that episode. It was one of the biggest responsibilities in terms of pages and lines in an episode of TV that I have ever had. I'm in every scene, or 3/4 of the scene, and I'm talking and having dialogue, and I'm interacting with just almost the entire cast. And it was, and Levar was so supportive and challenging at the same time. But insofar as making the character work, his physicality, it's funny, I don't make sort of mechanical decisions, I'm realizing, about characters' bodies. I believe very much in the actor's imagination. I believe in reading the text very thoroughly and very carefully, and then letting the imagination go to work about the circumstances and the scenes, and breathing as the character, and then the rest of it sort of forms itself around. I was watching my hands in that episode today, and I didn't realize how much I was doing the steepled hands. Your
hands are doing a lot of storytelling in this episode. I really enjoyed looking at those and watching what you were doing with them.
Yes, but I won't tell you. I'll tell you that I was watching, I was surprised. Everything you prepare, and then you prepare so that you're free in the moment of the performance, so that you're free to be in the world and you're not operating the character like a puppeteer, like a marionette. That way lies bad acting, because it's not organic, it's not spontaneous. Once you make that decision, then you have to listen. What I like very much about the performance, which also informs the body language, is the listening. There are very few things more important in acting, film acting or stage, than listening. I never learn the other person's lines. None. I learn my lines. I do not learn my scene partner's lines. I expend no energy on that in my entire career. Why? It's purposeful. I want to listen. I want to respond in an immediate way to the stimulus that's being given. I want to hear the information that is being spoken and not be listening. Oh, their word. oh, now my stuff. I don't want to, ever to be doing that. I know I learned the cue. I find out what my cue is, what the last couple of words, but I want to be listening to what they're saying before they get to the cue. I want to actually have my character be hearing them and responding. And in this particular episode, I feel like I did very satisfactory work in that regard.
I would say far more than just satisfactory. I thought in particular this episode, your scenes with Avery, you're talking about listening and reacting and responding. Avery seemed like an amazing scene partner for you to work with. And something I've noticed with him when we talked to other guests who got to do scenes with him is he very much feeds off having an adversarial counterpart, which Ch'pak very much provides.
He liked that very much. I think it got him engaged at that point in the series. I think, what I was able to bring something to that episode that engaged Avery and engaged Michael in a particular way, or at least there were some people around the production I remember who commented in that regard. And I like to think, as I said, my job as a character actor is to create texture around the money, the stars, but I also want to bring stimulation to them, and I want to challenge them, because usually, more often than not, sometimes you're an ally of the star, but more often, or the series regular, I get brought in to pose a problem, an obstacle. And you can't have a strong character in a drama if they're not overcoming a dimensional obstacle. And Ch'pak is the personification of obstacle for Captain Sisko and for Worf. And so the more dimensional I could make that, or in any role, in any of the shows I appear in, or films I appear in, the more that actor gets to bloom. Acting together it's a group activity. It's not a solo activity. I mean, I know there are people who don't like one-man shows. I've never wanted to do one. I have no interest. It's like playing with another good musician. They stimulate you, and I'd like to think at this point that I'm a good enough musician so that I stimulate my scene partners, and we get a good back and forth going. A good, that I hit the ball over the net hard enough so that, so to speak, or with enough spin so that they have to engage their skills to get it back across the net, if I can use that as a sports metaphor.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine you probably don't spend your days watching Star Trek DS9 like I do, but I can tell you I can tell you from watching, other episodes of guests I've spoken to, Caitlin Hopkins comes to mind because she did an episode where she was, again, similar kind of adversarial character to Avery. I felt like he really brought his A game to this episode, and you guys played off each other so well. Like, I feel like, and that's kind of a topic I want to talk about too. This episode is, we mentioned earlier, this is Levar Burton directed this one, and the stars of this episode. This is a Michael Dorn centric episode with Avery Brooks as his support and Ron Canada as the advocate going against him. This is basically, I'm trying to find like the best way to say it, but this is basically like a Black run episode with Black characters as the stars. And I feel like that really kind of brought together something different that we don't normally see on Deep Space Nine.
Yes, or see on any other television show. Really, in my career, it's not something, it's funny for us three African-American male actors, mature male actors, to be on screen together was a rare occurrence. I can remember doing an episode of Seventh Heaven with Keith.
Keith David.
Keith David, yes, Keith David and Mr. Collins, and we're the three of us together, And well, Keith and I laughing, saying to Stephen, man, you're participating in something rare. The two of us on screen together at the same time, this is a rare thing. And it is, in fact, the one and only time you will ever see Ron Canada and Keith David, who are contemporaneous, who are friendly colleagues, and whose careers are contemporaneous almost completely. That's the only time you'll ever see us on screen together. So for me and Avery and Michael to be there, I called it also the duel of the episode of the dueling bassos, because you have three kind of big voices of three guys who are kind of known for their voices going at each other. Although I was a little handicapped by the teeth. Yeah, it was special for that regard. And again, it was under the guidance of Levar, who is a man of such intelligence and dignity and a director of such skill and preparation and confidence, and enjoyed so much confidence from the crew, something you could feel that they loved going to war with this guy. And he had the respect of Avery and Michael. My impression of DS9 was that the camaraderie was not the same as what I talked about in SNG, but there was certainly respect all around. And Levar is just a leader. He's as good, maybe the best director of television that it's ever been my pleasure to work with. I think I know, given my film career, a little bit about directors, especially in terms of their interactions with actors. And, I have worked with Rob Reiner and William Friedkin and a couple other people like that. In my mind, Levar is as good as anybody. He has my gratitude for that performance as well, for helping me and guiding me and supporting me thoroughly.
Can you describe a little bit about what his directing style is like?
Confidence and relaxation. The two things that make good acting, he displays as a director. And you learn from, I direct some stage myself, and you like to think you learn from every good director that you ever have. And Levar just exudes confidence on the set, and it is contagious. He also, his preparation is complete and total. He's not a director who's always looking at his script. He's not looking at anything except watching you. He's not glued to Video Village. There's never any sense of tension or panic. He has this residing calm, which in that respect, he's like John Sayles, the great film director. He is just serene. He gives off an aura, or at least in that week of working with him, of there's nowhere else he'd want to be except right where he is. And how we're going to get this done, because we're us, and how could we fail, And people, he just creates an atmosphere where everyone is respected, and where you can tell the crew knows that they are respected and regarded, and they want to please him. And there's an efficiency because he is prepared, which is the thing that actors, and I think crew people, will tell you they most want from a director, that he or she be prepared, and to know that text in and out, up and down. And he also has the advantage of being a fine actor. And I'm sorry, in my experience, the best directors have always been people who have acted themselves. They have the most useful information to convey and know how to convey it. And they know what not to say and how not to get in your way. I can say that about Kevin Hooks. I can say it again about Rob Reiner, as directors or actors who stand out in my mind and who I've admired in my career. But Levar, top of the list for me. And I looked at that performance today, and I thanked him again. And I thought about what a superlative director he was.
I've only ever gone to one Star Trek convention ever in my life, and I basically got one autograph that day and one photo taken, and that was with Levar Burton. And I told him that day when I met him, I didn't want to be Geordi LaForge. I want to be Levar Burton because, I grew up with Reading Rainbow. I grew up seeing him on Star Trek. He became then this amazing director. He has this amazing, wonderful podcast. He's such an inspiring individual. So I'm really happy to hear that he's just so great to work with in that regard.
He is class personified, in my opinion.
So let's talk about your final appearance in the Star Trek franchise, and that is in Voyager. You were in season 5. Episode is Juggernaut, and you were a Malon named Fesek. And somehow they managed to get you into even more makeup and an even bigger outfit. Tell us about that.
That was some suit. But it wasn't that uncomfortable. I was amazed looking at it, how they were so amazing, that production company, how it was so fitted so precisely. And I was able to move in it, even at my, advanced age then. I guess I was about, I was 50 then. And I was looking at, I was probably quite spry and able to crawl around on my knees. But that makeup actually, even though it looked more elaborate, it wasn't as elaborate as Ch'Pok. But it was quite a bit, but it just wasn't as big. It was more, there seemed to be more separate pieces to Ch'Pok. Yeah, Robert Beltran was a friend, so I was happy to be on the show with Bob. And I was happy, again, watching the episode and remembering it, and watching it 3 in a row. I was happy at the differentiation between the 3 characters and how very different Fesek was from Ch'Pok. He was a much gentler soul, and I was quite satisfied with the effort with him as well today when I watched it. I would have been more distressed had I watched it, after the first time, or had I watched it 2 months after doing it. It's the more proximate you are to the performance, it's the harder it is to see the performance and to gain some objectivity about it. But that was a very interesting, again, a big responsibility. What I liked about Trek World, as you can see, especially after Martin Benbeck, Big Rick Berman, and became comfortable with me having big responsibilities in episodes, and I'm very proud of that, because Star Trek was demanding. You had to be able to handle dialogue. That's why so many actors with classical backgrounds are all over the Trek universe, because you learn to speak, to do the Greeks, and you learn to do Shakespeare. You have the necessary muscle, vocally and mentally and linguistically, to be able to handle the dialogue, which is demanding. You got to take that, a lot of techno talk, and make it sound like human speech and like it's every day. So yeah, it was fun.
Speaking of demanding, this was a seemingly very physically demanding episode. Like you said, you're basically crawling around in some parts while you're doing dialogue. You're crawling around through tunnels. It's very dark. It's very smoky, a lot of steam.
Yes.
I read Ethan Phillips said this is like a really challenging episode to film because of everything going on. And I know Roxanne had to do a lot of ADR for this episode due to all the noise. What was the experience like filming this episode?
It was vigorous. I don't think I could have done it today, or there would have been a lot more stuntman doing scenes. Like I said, it's 20 years later. It's no secret, I'm 71. It's all over the internet. Back then, I was about 50. It was demanding. It was challenging, and it was a lot of it. The set was very dark, actually. You know, a lot of that stuff on the bridge and the steam and the, I don't know, dry ice or whatever it was they were employing, lots of smoke, and it wasn't always easy to even see the other actors. And you know, it was fun though. Talk about adversarial working with Roxanne, who has become quite the director of television. I'm sure, as many of your people who follow your show know. Um, uh, we, uh, we went at each other in a pretty interesting way, and I like to think I created again a challenging texture for her to go against her and Kate Mulgrew, and which were basically the people that I did the scenes with, and a little bit with Bob before his character gets conveniently knocked out to leave Roxanne in charge of the situation.
Yeah, this episode was a lot more like the movie Aliens as opposed to an episode of Star Trek. It's a pretty different type of episode.
Yeah, it's much more action. I would say I was looking at the 3 episodes, and I would say the first one was a think piece, the Masterpiece Society. I'd say the second piece was a courtroom drama, the Deep Space Nine, and this third one was action. It was action.
So you've gotten to work with on screen Patrick Stewart in TNG, you got to work with Avery Brooks on DS9, and here you are with Kate Mulgrew.
Yes.
So what would you say would be the differences between those 3 Starfleet captains and working with them as scene partners?
Well, they're all superb professionals. You know, like you get to a certain level, and especially you're on a television show. You're a guest star, you have to step onto the moving train. And what you're expected to provide, along with the artistic stuff, the texture, is efficiency. You have to gain those people's confidence immediately, that they know that you're not going to be blowing takes and slowing production down. And you're not, you can be trusted in scenes, that you're equal to the job. And I think I was able to establish that in all 3 cases. I only had the one last scene with Patrick, and where he comes down to the planet, etc. But I think I made a good enough impression on him that we ended up doing quite a bit on stage together later on. Yeah, they're all at a certain level. You know, you're in the major leagues. And if I can use, again, a sports metaphor, if you're in the major leagues, whether you're in the all-star or in the starting lineup, or you're the kind of guy who comes off the bench for 100 games a year, 300, 400 at bats, you're expected to be able to hit a fastball. Everybody in the majors can hit a fastball. And so they all quickly came to understand that, and they all are consummate professionals. And they knew that I could do my job, and that's what they expect. They have pages and pages to learn for next week. They had multiple scenes to do. In Kate Mulgrew's instance, it was one of those, a light week for her, because she only has 2 or 3 scenes in the show. So that's the way on a long-running series that you give your lead a kind of a semi-week off, in that they don't have to carry such a burden, because it's very hard work. It's very hard work to be a lead on a television series for 20 plus, the way they used to be, 20, 22, 26 episodes. It's hard. You're there 10, 12-hour days. You're handsomely compensated, but there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into it. And my hat's off to those people, and I'm grateful for them. And I just try to enhance what they're doing to fit into the groove of what the show is about, to deliver what I delivered in the audition room, and keep the trains moving and get the pages shot every day.
So, Ron, you've given us a lot of great lessons today, and we're going to talk in a few minutes about the acting department, the classes that you run in New York. But I'd like to kind of, I guess, show a little bit more about your teaching knowledge here. And I heard an interview that you did a few years ago where you were discussing playing the intentions of a character on screen to use that as an effective tool to portray a character. So, using your 3 different Star Trek appearances as examples, can you kind of tell us about that concept of acting with intentions and finding intentions of a character?
Oh, well, everything starts. I always say, if it ain't on the page, it ain't on the stage. I'm not a creative artist. I don't make up lines. I read. I like to think I read extremely well, and I read with a background that's informed by a lot of great dramatic literature and literature in general. So, and I have a good imagination. So, overall, the overall intention, you have intentions within scenes, and intentions within lines, scenes, and then the overarching thing, what your character is trying to achieve overall in the script and the storytelling, which is the most important thing. The story is more important overall than your individual character. I think there's a trap that sometimes young actors and sometimes American actors have fallen into, of thinking that our quote unquote character is more important than the story. I have come to feel over time that the story is the thing, the play's the thing, as Bill Shakespeare said. So my overall intention, for instance, in Masterpiece Society, was to conserve, to save, and your intention should be expressible in verbs, preferably. Your acting, you should act with verbs. You should be able to describe what your character is trying to do in a scene with a verb. So I was trying to conserve in Masterpiece Society. In Deep Space Nine, very simple. I was trying to win. As my character says at one point, it's the fight that matters to me. I don't care. I'll defend. If I get Worf back to the Klingon planet, I'll defend him, because what I live for is the battle.
I love that Chapok voice.
With Fesek in the Voyager, survival. So those are the big overarching intentions. Okay, that's you're understanding what your character is trying to do in the story. Okay, and then you go scene by scene. You just, what am I trying to do in this particular scene? There's a scene you talk about in Masterpiece Society where there's so many different levels of anger, but there's one scene in particular where I'm talking to, I believe the character's name was Adam, the actor's name was John Snyder, the leader of the planet, and I'm talking to him about what he's putting at risk. I'm not chastising at that. There's the scene where I was pleading with him. I was pleading rather than I wasn't trying to use a hammer on him. I was the overall intention in the scene the main intention in the scene was please. That was the most subject. Please don't do this, rather than demanding that he not do it. That's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. And you have to know on any scene What does my character want? That's a very basic question. What does my character want in this scene? And then what's stopping him? It's usually your scene partner, the other character, right? That's where we get the drama, the conflict. And what am I going to do to this person in order to get what my character wants? That's fundamental of acting. If you're not dealing with those things, you're not going to be effective. And now, what techniques you use to get there, that's a matter of choice. That's your toolbox and your training, and your homework. But in order for us to have a successful scene, we both have to be doing those things. And it won't work if only one of us is doing it. And when scenes really crackle and are memorable, if it's B.D. Wong and Michael Christopher and Mr. Robot, it's because they're both doing the things that I'm talking about.
That is a great lesson. It's all about the fundamentals with really anything that you do that you try to master in life. Using boxing as an example, because I know you're a combat sports guy too. You can't really learn how to throw a knockout punch until you learn how to jab. So it's all about what you do with those fundamentals. Once you get them, then you can take the next steps to move forward. So great lesson.
That's right. Jab and balance, right?
Yep. All about the footwork, but that's a different episode altogether.
And the fundamentals, once you learn them, they're the same. And actually, the process simplifies itself over time, because a lot of things that you think are important when you're a young actor, you realize that that's just wheel spinning and self-indulgence, that you have to do those fundamental things. One of the great actors I've gotten to work with, Anthony Hopkins, they said, Anthony, how do you do? And he's one of the most fantastic actors on this planet. He says, I read the script over and over again. I read it over and over again. You can't get more fundamental than that. Anyway, good fundamentals, good results.
So your career is littered with sci-fi shows and films, and we didn't really even talk about Babylon 5 or The X-Files today, but the last thing I want to ask you about in the realm of sci-fi is what many consider to be the continuation of Star Trek, and that's The Orville, which is Seth MacFarlane's show, and you've been in several episodes of that. I know we mentioned Ted too, you worked with Seth on that as well. But can you tell us about, working on The Orville? I know most of your scenes have been through a holo emitter, if you will, basically not necessarily with the main cast, but what's your experience been like on The Orville so far?
Well, I loved working on The Orville because Seth is so clearly and obviously a fan. You probably noticed Brandon Braga is there in a supervisory capacity as well. Everything about The Orville reflects Seth's love and admiration of Star Trek. And I think it's obvious to anybody who watches the two shows. And there's more humor in it, but he's not mocking. He's not doing Galaxy 5 or 9 or whatever. He genuinely loves it. And he has so many Trek persons. The last episode I did was directed by Jonathan Frakes. And it was it was the only one where I wasn't being seen through the screen, holo screen, the communication screen. And it was with Ted Danson and Victor Garber and Tony Todd. We're all in the scene together in an episode of The Orville that was directed by Jonathan. So all of those Trek people and some of the people from the costume and design people are Trek veterans. It's just very evident if you've been in both worlds that there's a real respect and reverence, although Seth gives it his spin. I think Seth probably watched every episode of Trek, old and new, and had a fantasy of being a starship captain, and he became big enough and successful enough and important enough to the studio that he got to, and he's talented enough, so he got to have his fantasy. He got to be sitting in the command chair of a starship.
I just started watching The Orville only recently on Hulu, and of course the episode that you're in where you're on screen with like all those great people I haven't even gotten to yet. So now I've got something to look forward to at the very least.
Yeah, yeah. I look for the episode directed by Jonathan. I think it's season 2. It's early season. I believe it's season 2. It's one of the first 2 or 3 episodes. But um, yeah, Ted, Victor, and Tony Todd. I
I
mean,
know.
wow.
Wow. Tony's again one of those guys like I'm dying to get on this show because he is just such an amazing actor. He's been in
Oh,
some very great DS9 episodes too.
yeah, Tony's a lovely, lovely man. I've met such nice people on Trek World too. That's the thing. So many people I remember for just what pleasant human beings they were. Robert Picardo, a very lovely man. Yeah, but Tony is just a warm individual and was always trying to give me hints on how to get on the convention circuit, which the conventions have never been interested in me. It's been just interesting. It's fascinating. Never, ever, have I gotten even the slightest feeler from a convention. But Tony, of course, was a big convention guy, but just one of the nicest guys in Hollywood that I met during my 25 years there. He plays such fierce characters and sometimes monsters, but he is a big, gentle, warm guy. And so yeah, and Ted. I love Ted. Always loved Ted.
So Ron, across your very prolific career, what would you say would be the worst day you ever had on a set and the best day you ever had on a set?
Worst day. Wow. Now that's a weird. That's a heck of a question. Boy, it's hard. I love my job so much. That's very difficult, Matthew. Right off the top of my head,
That's probably a good thing if you haven't had any really bad days then.
I can't think of it. A worst day would be somehow to be unprepared or holding up production, and you don't get to have my career and my resume if that happens. So no. Wow, the best day, huh? But also, there have been so many good ones. I remember the first day that I worked on West Wing was probably a great day because that show had been on for years, and during the first regime, and I had never had a chance to be on it. And I'm an old Washington journalist, I know politics pretty well on a firsthand basis. I had a White House press pass when I was 25 years old. So I know a little bit about it. And the fact that I never got a chance to be on that show until the second regime. But anyway, John Wells took over for the last year or two. And my first scene was with Allison Janney. And that was fun. It was joy. And, she sort of let me know that, I did well. And I loved just about every day I was ever in the Situation Room with Martin on West Wing. He's a marvelous guy and got to work with the great John Spencer. So that was pretty terrific. Yeah. And the entire episode as we've gone over, the entire Rules of Engagement episode. And I had a bad head cold or was suffering from allergies rather that through that entire episode. And, but it was a joy to work with Levar. So yeah, those come to mind right off the top, but there's, like I said, I've been fortunate. I've gotten to do what I love to do for well over 30 years now.
Yeah.
And
you've been in over 200 things. I mean, I'm just curious if there's one piece of work across your career so far that you're the most proud of.
Well, I would have to say that the highest quality artistic thing that I've ever been part of, that is, critically acclaimed. Of course, I'm happy about Adventures in Babysitting because it's beloved by people, but from the audience acceptance point. But John Sayles' Lone Star, starring Chris Cooper and the late Elizabeth Pena and Matthew McConaughey and Yeah, I'm Carmen de Lavalade. If I had to write my own obit and the first thing that I would want mentioned, or if people could only see one thing that I was ever in, it would be Lone Star, I guess.
That's
But
a very good one.
Adventures in Babysitting is pretty good.
So you've given us a lot of really great information today on acting itself, and I know these days you have your own academy. You've got the acting department in New York. Can you tell us a little bit about the acting department?
Well, it really was a course that I gave. And I keep the website up because I have friends my producing partner who keeps hoping that I'll get back to it. And post COVID, who knows? And as you get to be an older actor, you never know how much they're going to want to use you. But basically, I set up because so much of the business has moved from Hollywood, North Hollywood, and Burbank. So much of television has moved back to where it began, dramatic television, scripted television. It's across the river in Queens and Brooklyn. And there's a great acting pool here, of course, of actors who act on Broadway and off Broadway. But a lot of them have a great deal of stage experience and not so much on camera experience. I mean, everybody here has their episode of Law and Order, I guess. But I wanted to create a course where I could help good stage actors transition into competent on-camera actors in over a course, an 8-week course. And so that was the purpose of it. And I wanted it to be affordable for actors, but I wanted to give something back to the profession. I love actors. It's the only club I've ever wanted to be a part of, is the club of actors, professional actors. And I just wanted to help people who I knew were talented to be successful in the audition room, to be successful at work, to understand what the expectations were, and to understand how to turn their talents, their ability to play, into the ability to play within the frame. It's like the difference between playing live concert and playing in a studio. They're not the same thing. You're doing the same thing, but you employ somewhat different techniques. And almost the difference between stage and camera, you're applying almost opposite technique. And I just wanted to explain it to them clearly, and also to show them, to work with them, to put people on camera, to make corrections, give them feedback, and then put them back on camera and let them see for themselves how it works. So that was the origin of the acting department. And I called it that because I wanted them to know that just as on a film set, there's the camera department, the sound department, the wardrobe department, the set department, the art department, that you're the acting department. And you're responsible for the storytelling and performance, and that you have to come ready with that because you're expected to know the most about your character in the story. And people in theater, we get to spend weeks in developing our character and being guided by the director, etc. When you get on a movie or television set, particularly on a television set, the director is there to get those pages shot. And every department is expected to function. And so it's a different mindset. And I wanted to be able to convey that mindset. And it starts with the name. So hopefully I'll be able to renew the course again. And that's why the website stays up, because my producing partner hopes that I will give the course again.
I definitely do hope the acting department makes a comeback because, I think today has been a great example of just what type of instruction you offer. And it's been some amazing lessons you've given us today. So, and you're so clear and descriptive and easy to understand. So really, you've given everybody today quite a gift just by giving us a little bit of taste of what the acting department is like.
Well, I like to demystify acting or demythologize it. It's a set of skills. It's not a mystery. The talent is maybe a mystery, but who gets it and who doesn't. But there is a lot of baloney that gets talked about by acting. But I also want people to understand it. I want to help them to have an appreciation of what's going on when they watch it. So I'm always glad to to kind of try to take the smoke and mist away from around it and a lot of the mythological stuff. There was only one Brando, one.
So Ron, last thing for today, what is the best thing about being a part of the Star Trek universe?
Oh, wow. Wow, Matthew. It's being part of something so universally loved that it reaches people around the world, people in just about certainly every industrialized country, but some third world countries too, something that people love globally. Something that I think it will be enduring and continues to endure. Something that brought me great joy and made me feel included in the future. I think Whoopi Goldberg has said this something very similar. Whoopi and I are exactly the same age. And she grew up in the housing projects in New York like me, and I think had the same experience. But more than that, something that is so hopeful about the future of mankind, especially when we look around what we've been through the last several years and what we're going through, what the whole world is going through. The hope, the picture, the hopeful picture, and the hopeful mythology that Star Trek world creates, and what it's done to open the way for Ron Moore and David Icke's great show, Galactica, the Galactica reboot, and so much good television sci-fi that exists now. So I'm proud of it, and I'm proud. There's the only kind of immortality that we have is what art we participate in that lives after us. So.
Well, I'm glad you're proud of your appearances on the Star Trek franchise because they are all very memorable appearances. And I want to thank you again today for being so generous with especially your time today, but also the stories, all the great information, a lot of great lessons for anybody who wants to be an actor or director, especially. I think there's a lot of good things to pick up here in this interview. I love the way you present your information. You're an excellent teacher. So I really do hope the acting department makes some kind of comeback in 2021. So Ron, thank you so much today. It's been a wonderful time chatting with you.
Thank you, Matthew. Likewise, it's been a pleasure.
And that was our chat with Ron Canada, whose expertise and passion for the art of acting is matched by his ability to explain so eloquently about what he does. He's a true master of his craft and someone worth studying and learning more from for sure, as well as celebrating like we did here today. And a reminder for anybody who wants to learn more about the acting department, visit roncanada.nyc. Hopefully, Ron gets back to teaching again at some point, but even if he doesn't start holding classes again in the traditional sense, I suggest if you're interested in learning more from him about performing, go ahead and send him a message and maybe you could set up a private session with him. It would absolutely be money well spent, and if you do, I'd love to hear about it. Going back to Ron's episode of Deep Space Nine, Rules of Engagement was originally supposed to center around Sisko and not Worf, and the ending would have involved holographic imagery instead of what ultimately happened in that episode. Ira Steven Behr ultimately made the right decision in tweaking the story into what it was. And speaking of Ira, he's also the person responsible for that directing idea of having the testimonies speak directly to the camera, having gotten the idea from a Spike Lee film. Levar Burton really liked the idea and found it a very fun and also challenging experience, but one that ultimately clearly reaped very great awards in the final version that made it to TV. Another interesting thing to note about the changes that happened from when the show first went into production versus what ultimately aired is that originally Worf was going to be forced to remove his baldric, which is that sash that he wears across his chest. Ch'pak was going to request that he not be allowed to wear it since he was no longer recognized as part of the Klingons and was offended by the sight of this dishonored son of Moog wearing it. So that wraps up this week's episode of Trek Untold. Thank you so much for checking it out this week. Please make sure that you're following us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, all at Trek Untold. That's one word, no spaces, at Trek Untold. It's the best way to get updates on guests, check out all the memes and other things that we're posting, and interact with myself and other Star Trek fans. If you'd like to support this podcast, go ahead and check out patreon.com/TrekUntold and become a subscriber to the show. Or check out teespring.com/stores/TrekUntold to check out some of our merchandise. If you've been enjoying Trek Untold, please leave us a rating and review on iTunes or wherever you're listening to podcasts. And if you're on YouTube, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel, youtube.com/nerdnewstoday. Leaving ratings, reviews, and comments are things that all help this podcast grow, and they'll cost you nothing but a few seconds of your time. Doing things like that, or even telling your friends or other Star Trek fans about the stuff you've heard on the show and making sure they know about us, are huge helps to keeping Trek Untold growing. Thank you once again to our sponsor, Triple Fiction Productions. Go ahead and check them out at triple-fictionproductions.net. If you'd like to send us some feedback about this episode, suggest a guest, or ask to be booked on the show, go ahead and send me an email at trekuntold@gmail.com. And of course, thanks to listeners like you for choosing Trek Untold and making it your weekly Star Trek podcast. This has been Trek Untold. I'm Matthew Kaplowitz, and until next time, fortune favors the bold.
Trek Untold is sponsored by TrekSphere.com, promoting fan-produced Star Trek content in all forms, is powered by the RageWorks podcasting network, and is affiliated with Nerd News Today.